Do you want to learn how to make a beautiful wine rack like this on your CNC machine? Of course you do, you're watching the video. We're going to talk about material selection. I'm going to show you how to design it and then how to finish it off at the end. So what are we waiting for? Let's crack on with the video. So let's talk about material. Ultimately, the joys of today's project is you can be quite flexible with the size of it. Because we're cutting out multiple parts, you can rejig those parts to suit the size piece of material that you have. So for example, if yours is a bit wider, maybe not as long, you can easily make everything fit. So I'm using this board today. It is 200, 850, 20 millimeters deep. So 8 inches, 34 inches. Just over 3/4 of an inch. I can't remember the exact conversion for 20 millimeters. I'm sure one of you will put it down in the comments. In terms of the species of the material, the type of wood, this is Iroko, I think, not 100% sure, but you can use something like pine furniture board, which is quite cheap, even something like plywood. In fact, plywood would actually come out pretty well because we're going to be seeing all of the end grain on this, so the different layers in the plywood would actually look pretty good, and I may even do a plywood version after I have finished this one. So that is the material options. It is quite flexible. You can make it work for you. So we're about to do the software portion of the video where I'll show you how to draw and design all of this in Carveco Maker. But just as a reminder, CNCWITHME will have all of these files readily available, plus lots of other projects and new ones coming out every single week. It is a great resource for people just starting to get into CNC, as well as the more experienced people looking for inspiration and, say, new projects to do. It is a great community, tons of help and support, as well as weekly things happening like podcasts and catch-ups. The discount code James Dean Designs will also get you 10% off, so definitely go and check it out. But for now, let's open Carveco Maker and start designing a wine rack. So before we start designing, just as a reminder, this is part of my Carveco Maker beginner series. If you think I run through anything a little bit too quick, it's probably because we've covered it in more detail in a previous episode. There will be a link in the top right hand corner to all of the previous videos. Now we're going to start by clicking new model as always and entering in the dimensions of my material. This is 850 millimeters wide, 200 millimeters high, and we're going to leave the resolution at full with the origin in the bottom left hand corner. We'll click OK to generate the model. Now with that generated, the first thing we want to do is start drawing the circles for the wine rack holder. So we're going to come over to the circle tool. And what we're going to do is give this a diameter of 85 millimeters. Now, most circles that bottles of wine that I measured seem to be around the 80 millimeter mark. So obviously, depending on what you want to hold in this, if it is something like whiskey or vodka or something like that, just check the diameter of your bottles before you do so and make sure they are the same. Now we're going to click create to make that circle permanent. Now I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, and we need to create a couple of copies of this circle. So we're going to come up to the block copy tool up on the top toolbar. And what we're going to do is leave the X gap at 15 millimeters. This will space them out with 15 millimeter gaps in between them. We're going to leave the direction going to the right hand side. And when it comes down to copies, we're going to have this as 3, meaning it will have the original plus 2 additional ones on the side. We don't need to worry about the rows. Just leave that as 1 because we only want one line of circles. So we click apply and generate those additional circles. Now I'm going to hit F9 just to bring these all into the center of the screen for ease when we are designing. Now the next thing that we need to do at this phase is almost cut through the middles of these circles here so we can join them up with those curves that you would have seen on the original design. So I'm going to come over to the rectangle tool, and we're just going to draw a rectangle roughly in the middle there. Now for the height of this, I'm going to make it 45 millimeters. The width is sort of irrelevant, so we'll click create and make that permanent. Now again, I'm going to hit F9 just to make sure it's centered with all those circles. So we now need to tell Carveco Maker to cut through those circles with the shape that we have just generated. So we're going to select everything together. We're then going to come up to the vector menu, down to merge, and use the explode option at the bottom. Once we click that, everywhere there is a line that intersects, it will make them a separate line. So for example, if we now click here, we can see these have all been broken up into individual lines. We're just going to delete out all the ones that we don't want, which is basically all of the ones in the middle, and these straight lines still keeping everything connected. So what we end up being left with is a C on the left, an opposite C on the right, and these two curves in the middle. Now to join these up, what we're going to do is select two of them together. And towards the bottom left hand side of your toolbar, there are two options, a join vector and a close vector. Now to begin with, we're going to use the join vector option. Click and hold down and a pop out appears, and you'll want to go to the join vectors with a curve option. Click on that. And you'll see there, it just put that nice curve in, connecting those two separate vectors. We'll do it for the two bottom ones as well. Select those together, click the button again, it puts the curve back in, and we'll keep doing this until we've got it done. Now, when it comes to the final one, you'll see here we have a red and a green dot. This indicates the start and end of a vector line. Now, this one is slightly different. We need to close the vector here as opposed to join it. So what we'll see is that original button we were using has now been grayed out, and we only have the close vector tool. Same principle though, click, hold it down, and come to the curve option, and you'll see it puts the curve back in just like it did earlier on. Now obviously this is the inner part of the wine rack. We now want to create an offset to this to give the outer part, obviously, that will ultimately machine out to keep this shape. So we're going to come up to the vector menu again, and we're going to come down to offset. This also does exist in your toolbar down here in the left hand side, so you can click that as well to get the same thing. Now what we got over on the offset menu on the right hand side is an offset distance of 15 millimeters. We want this to go outwards from the original vector, and we want to keep the radius or the curves that we have in place. Now down the bottom you have an option that says delete original vector. Make sure that is unticked because we want to keep the original shape that we have highlighted on screen. So we'll click offset now and make that a permanent offset. You can now start to see, obviously, we have the general shape of the wine bottle holder appearing, but what we want to do is add a base to this, obviously, so it can stand up. So what we're going to do is come over to the rectangle tool. I'm just going to roughly draw a rectangle about here, but give it some specific dimensions. I'm going to make this 35 millimeters wide and 150 millimeters high. We're going to click create, make that permanent, and then what I'm going to do is just hit F9 to make sure it is centered with the circles, but drag it over to the left hand side, and I just want it clipping at the bottom of this curved arc, just so we basically take a little bit out of this as part of the bottle holder area. Now what we need to do is merge the outer shape with this new rectangle that we have just created to basically make it part of the entire shape. So we're going to select both of these together. We're then going to come up to the vector menu again, come down to the merge option, but we're going to use the weld option this time. This basically just merges both shapes together and gets rid of any lines in the middle area. So if we click on that, we can now see that that has basically all become one joined up vector. But what we can see over here is we have nice curves going on within the circles, but these curves are a little bit sharp, so we're going to soften them. Now even if we cut this out normally with a bit, it would still leave a slight radius, but let's make this a conscious decision. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the fillet tool, which is down here on the bottom left hand side. We're going to select that. I have a fillet radius over here in the top right of 5 millimeters, and we're going to leave it selected as fillet arc. Now what happens when I zoom in on this point, when the cursor hovers over the point, it changes to a crosshair. Now this basically means we can apply the fillet to that point. So if I click on it, it puts a nice curved radius in. If I zoom back out and do it to the bottom one, you'll see it do exactly the same again as I hover over it and click and give it that nice radius. I'm also going to pull the points in slightly just to make these edges a little bit more angled. So we'll come over to the node editing tool, the second arrow down. I'm just going to select the one node in the top right hand corner, click down with the arrow button once, and do the same on the bottom. We're going to click the bottom node and press up on that once just to give these nice angled edges. So we can zoom out slightly now and see the whole shape in its entirety. So that is basically the outline for the bottle holder itself, but the way we're adding the depth to this is we're going to create some segments in the middle of it, so when we join the two pieces up, it has support, but also it has the depth to take the bottles themselves. Now the easiest way to do this is we want to basically take a copy of this shape itself. So we're going to select that, press Ctrl C or Edit Copy up here in the top menu. We're going to drag this one over to the left hand side. We're then going to press Ctrl V or paste, put this one in and drag it to the right hand side. So we have a copy of the original now. What we're going to do is basically cut the bottom and cut the top, so we can then have these little blocks to help use as fillers. The way to do this is we are going to come over to the rectangle tool, and we're pretty much just going to drag this over the middle section of the entire job. So maybe something like that. So with that done, we'll click create and we'll make this a permanent rectangle. Now what we're going to do is basically what we did earlier and use the explode tool to just completely punch this out. So we'll come up to vector, merge and down to explode. Now that's basically just broken all of these lines up into separate pieces. So we're going to just go around and delete all the parts that we don't need. Highlight all the bits in the middle, hit delete, and then we're just going to delete all of these extra lines out of the way. Now technically these little joining lines there we could have left in, but the reason I've taken them out is it'll just be cleaner to join them up separately than trying to join all the original lines up. So what I'm going to do now is just zoom in and highlight these two parts here. Now back down to these menus in the bottom left hand side, but instead of joining with a curve, we want to click and down and click join with a straight line. And now that has just completed that one there. If we come down to the bottom, we've got the opposite again. Instead of a join, it needs to be the close. So we'll click on that button for the close and again come to the straight line, and that has just completed that vector. Now if we go over to the other side, we can do exactly the same here. Highlight both pieces. We're going to join the vector with a straight line first, and we're then going to close it with a straight line just to complete that piece. So if we reposition the board, what we now have is obviously the wine rack itself and the shapes for the filler pieces. Now we want a couple of these to add some depth. The way I'm basically treating this is we're going to create one half of it first with a couple of filler pieces and then replicate it ultimately to be the back half of the wine bottle holder. So it now sort of becomes a bit of a jigsaw puzzle of moving things around to get them to fit as best as possible. To begin with, I'm just going to drag the original bottle holder up to the top left corner. I want to leave a little bit of a gap around the edge, obviously, for when it is cutting, but get it as close as up there as possible, just to give us the most amount of room around it. Now, when it comes to these two additional shapes, one thing to factor in is the grain pattern of the wood. So the grain on the wood that we're using is effectively running left to right. Now, if you cut everything in the same orientation, then obviously all of the grain pattern will be the same. But if, for example, if we take this shape and rotate it, we'll click the T tool, rotate it 90 degrees, hold down the Alt key for that star that gives you the set measurements. Now, if we cut this out in this angle, the grain pattern across it will be going across it as opposed to up and down, if that makes sense. The grain pattern will now technically be going in a different direction. So when we glue this up all together later on, you'll effectively have the front piece, which is one grain direction, versus this piece, which is a different grain direction. This can make things look nice. You sort of get a bit of a zebra pattern going on with the different shades and the different colors of the grain as they are cut in different directions. But one thing to factor in, as I say, is it will make it look a bit different. So it really depends on the outcome that you want from the project. I'm going to leave this one in this orientation and I'll bring it down here and just try and fit it somewhere about there. Now I'm going to take another copy of this part, Control C, Control V, and we're going to drag this over here and rotate this back around 90 degrees to be vertical, and we're just going to try and fit this roughly in that space there. So we now have two copies of that part, and we also need two copies of this original, this top curve piece over here. So I'm going to rotate this one round to there and bring this maybe into this little gap down here where it's got a bit of space around it. And then we're going to press Control C, Control V and move that. We've got a big space in here. I mean, we could try to get it down in this corner. We may as well use the dead space going on in the middle here. So what we have now is basically one half of the setup. We have a front, we have a couple of filler pieces in the middle. So the easiest thing to do now is select everything, press Control C, Control V, and take a duplicate and just drag it over here. Hold the Alt key and it will keep everything all in line. So we now have all of the pieces for our wine rack. We just need to create the toolpath. So the hard work's done. We can now do the easier part. We're going to select all of the items. We're going to come up to the toolpaths menu, or you can select the profile toolpath from the top menu up here. We're going to leave the profile set on the outside line. We're going to leave final pass thickness turned off and final pass allowance. As a reminder, final pass thickness is the depth of the very last cut that it takes as it's cutting through the material. Final pass allowance is once it's cut all through the material, it will do the last pass basically as a shaving around the outside just to clean everything up. But we'll leave those turned off for now. The start depth is 0 from the top of the material, and the finish depth is going to be 20.2. My material is 20 millimeters thick, so I just want to cut slightly through the thickness of the material. For the profiling tool, we're going to select the Downtown Jenny, which is towards the bottom of my tool database. There we have 1/4 inch Downtown Jenny. And just as a reminder, if you want to purchase any Jenny bits, the discount code James Dean Designs will get you a decent discount off Cody's website. We're going to leave the cutting direction as climb. Not going to add any leading or out moves, but I will add ramping moves. These help extend the life of your bits. My standard default settings are in place. We're not going to use any bridges because we'll be holding this down with blue tape and CA glue. And then for the material, I'm going to click on that and give it a depth of 20 millimeters. We're then going to click OK. Let's give it a name, just wine rack for now. And we'll generate the toolpaths. And that is to say pretty much all of the work done. The only final step really is to save these files out and then move over to the CNC machine. Of course, if you want to be safe, you can right click on toolpaths and simulate them all just to check it is cutting out as expected. Now what we can see like here is there is a slight overlap between the toolpaths, so you may want to try and space these out a little bit more if you think there is a danger. But ultimately I'm happy with that, so we can move over to the CNC machine and get this cut. So the material is now secured to the bed just using blue tape and Star Bond. There are some links and discount codes to this in the description area, but there are other glues available as well. So it is now nice and secure on the bed. The other tip is you want to make sure it is obviously kept parallel to the machine. So if you've got something like an edge to stop it against, do that. I've just simply aligned it to all the screw holes for the T-track. So say it should be parallel with my machine. We have the Downtown Jenny bit installed into the router. So I suppose the next thing to do really is just to jog this over to the bottom left-hand corner, get it all zeroed in, and well, start the job and get cutting. So the job has cut and this stage is complete. Now, this is the part of the video some YouTube channels will skip over, but I'm always honest with my jobs. Whilst the cuts have come out nice and clean, some of the sharper corners have broken off. Now, this is not all of them, it is only some of them. It's not a failure. I will learn something from this one way or another. I suspect the issue is the species of the wood that I have chosen. I need to go and double check what this actually is, and ultimately that can change the way you machine things. So I'll update you later on in the video once I have figured this out. But we're going to move on with the next steps and still get this taken off the bed, assembled and obviously finished up. Once we have taken it off the bed, we're going to give it a light sand down and then start to glue it all together. In terms of finishing, I'm probably just going to apply some sort of oil to this, just to say bring out the grain and make it pop a little bit more, because it doesn't really need to be hard wearing, so a simple oil should be good enough. But we'll talk about that in the next segment. So there's a few useful pieces of information in this next segment. First, let's start with the sanding. So all of the parts have now had a light sanding down. I mainly use the oscillating spindle sander with obviously different size drums to make my life easier, but I still had to get in the tighter gaps by hand. Now the point to stress here is a light sanding. You just want to give the edges a very quick cleanup. Now we've got to stick all this together shortly, and if you've over sanded any particular area, things might not align as well as they should. So light sanding first. Once it's all stuck together, we can give it a heavier sanding to flush any of those slight edges off. Now the next thing to talk about is the grain pattern of the wood. Earlier on, we cut some pieces one direction with the grain and some pieces other direction with the grain. Now this obviously shows up when we come to assemble the piece. So the decision you have to make is, do you want all of the grain patterns together? Do you want it more like a zebra pattern? Have a play about, see what looks best. Obviously, if you've done this all in the same direction with the grain, perfect. The decision has already been made for you. Now, the next thing to talk about is obviously gluing this all up. Just some bog standard wood glue is all you need, and some method to clamp it all together. Now, you can use cheap quick grips like these, or you can use more expensive parallel clamps like these. Obviously, the parallel clamps do apply the pressure better, but it really depends on what you've got. It doesn't take a huge amount of pressure to get this all assembled. So I'm now going to apply some glue to this, as I say, get it all clamped up together, let it dry, and then we can come back once all that's done. So the glue up is complete. We've left it overnight to dry. I'm about to release the clamps, clean up some of the excess glue with a sharp knife. Ideally, you should probably clean that up before the glue fully sets, just to make your life a little bit easier. When it comes to gluing this up, obviously I've done it in one complete setup. You can do this in multiple pieces if you're less confident. So for example, you may glue the middle sections here together, you may glue the middle sections there together, and then bring it all together as one piece at the end. Obviously, be careful when you're putting the top sections on. Not only does it need to align, but it also needs to be correct on the rotation as well. But let's get this released, start to get it cleaned up, and all being well, we can then get it finished. So this has now been sanded and ready for a coating of oil. The sanding isn't perfect. It's kind of difficult to finish a piece off knowing that there are little flaws in it that you're not happy with. But as I say, I still wanted to complete it for the purpose of this video. So let's move on, let's get it oiled up, and hopefully make all of this grain pop a little bit more. So here is the final product. I'm pretty happy with how it came out, considering I'm not great at finishing. I'll talk you through my steps. Start with a really low grit sandpaper like 100. This is quite aggressive, and ultimately it's there to flush off any of those joints and get rid of any of the excess glue that came out from when it was clamped. Spend as much time as you can doing this first round of sanding, because it will make life easier later on. Now, after the first round was done, we then applied a layer of Danish oil to this. Put it on with a brush, let it sit for around 10 minutes, and then wiped any excess off with a lint-free cloth. Gave that a good 8 hours to set and to harden off before starting to repeat the process. So I then went up to a 200 grit sandpaper, then another layer of Danish oil, 400, another layer, 600, another layer. And at this point, you start to get a pretty smooth finish on the wood itself. Now, after that, I applied another layer of Danish oil, because ultimately, once you've done your final sanding, the more layers of Danish oil you start to apply, the glossier it will become. I've kind of got a bit of a gloss, bit of a satin look going on at the moment with this, but if I'd applied another one, it would have just got glossier and glossier. So it's really, you know, the type of look that you're trying to achieve. But definitely spend the time finishing it off, because you will be happier at the end of it. Lessons learned. This was the first time using Meranti. Now, I can't say it's been my favourite wood to use. The end result looks really nice, and the colours and things, but ultimately I don't feel it machined as well as some other woods that I've used in the past, so I probably won't use this again. Now, if you are thinking of obviously investing in CNCWITHME, Jenny Bits, Carveco Maker, the code James Dean Designs will get you a good discount off them, and there are links in the description area below. I really hope you found this video useful. If you did, obviously, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed if not done so already. Final thanks as always goes to my patrons. I'll see everybody on the next episode.